I've filmed this video at least 5 times at this point, and every single time I just either haven't been able to finish it for reasons of getting too emotional or running out of time or whatever it was. But frankly, the underlying reason is that I just haven't really had the confidence to share this story. This video is going to be twofold in parts. The first part is going to be talking about just kind of my experience being on this farm and the things that I went through. Ultimately, it's going to be explaining the feelings of trauma that I still have to cope with to this day because of this experience. The second section is going to be talking about the realities of dairy farming and the fact of the matter being that there is no humane way to farm dairy. I know that this story is going to potentially offend some people very deeply, and so I want to throw out a quick disclaimer because of that. I'm not going to apologize because this is something that happened to me, and so thereby I don't feel that anybody has the right to ask me to take this down or to censor anything, because this was something that happened to me and this was something that deeply affected me. And if this was really something that people had an issue with, being that they were involved, that's something that they should have dealt with at the time and not allowed themselves to, do or act in certain ways that now might end up online and might end up incriminating them. That said, I'm not going to give out any personal details, I'm not going to give out any names, I'm not going to give out any specific locations, but I know that there are people that will be able to deduce who it is that I'm talking about. And so if you know that that's going to offend you, this is a clear warning ahead of time that you should turn this video off and simply not watch it. What I'm going to be talking about is my experience dairy farming. When I graduated high school, I took a year off and decided that I was just going to travel. I was just going to kind of enjoy myself, not go right into college, not jump right into more schooling. I was going to do something that I felt like I was really going to enjoy, was really going to give me new experiences, and ultimately was just going to give me some time broken off from school between high school and the impending time that I would spend in college. So here's what happened. In June or July of 2015, after I graduated from high school, I finished my Eagle Scout requirements and became an Eagle Scout, and then started looking for farms that I could spend some time on. What I wanted to do was be part of an organization called WOOFing. Now, WOOFing stands for Worldwide Organic Something Farming, and basically what it is you can find these different farms around the world. You can offer them your time in exchange for room and board. And usually how it breaks down is you work for 5 days and you get 2 days off. And for those 5 days that you work, you only work 5 hours. So it's a very part-time gig. And the idea is that you're literally just trading your time for room and board. They don't really pay you usually, and so that's kind of what they consider to be a fair trade-off. I have family up in Maine, and they connected me with farmers that they knew who owned a small organic dairy farm, and they said, hey, this might be something that you would really enjoy. At the time, I thought, I really wanted to work with animals because, I loved animals, right? So much that I was eating them all the time. And so I figured, hey, you know what? I love animals. I want to spend time with animals. I'm going to go out and, work on a farm with animals. And so when this opportunity presented itself, I was like, dude, this is perfect. This is what I'm doing. Absolutely yes. So I talked on the phone with the farmer for a few sessions, and basically it worked out to the point where, he was like, yeah, I could absolutely use somebody that would help me out. What I found out that it was literally just him and his wife that were operating this farm for the most part, and so having an extra hand would really help them out. So the end of September rolls around 2015, and so I pack up my beat up little Subaru Impreza and I head up to Maine. I drive up the coast, pass through New York City, all these interesting places, and after like 15, 16 hours, I finally arrive in Maine. For the first 2 weeks, I spent some time with my family. I go to a place called the Common Ground Fair, go camping. It was really, really cool. I had a great time. Really like kind of crunchy granola fare. If anyone's ever in Maine, I absolutely recommend you go because it was a super fun time. I had an excellent time. I met a lot of really cool people, had some really good food, saw some really sweet demonstrations with like electric cars and some like really weird like spiritual stuff. I don't know. There was so much that happened, and it was a really cool experience. And so if anyone's really into like nature and organic agriculture and stuff like that, sustainability, I absolutely recommend you check out the Common Ground Fair because it was an absolutely good time. But after a couple days of just putzing around, hanging out with my family, seeing some cool stuff, it was time for me to head to the farm. So I headed out to the farm, which was an hour or so away from where my family lived, and I met the farmer and I met his wife, and they kind of showed me around the farm, and it seemed really awesome. I mean, it was in a beautiful place. Lots of animals. I mean, they had horses and goats and chickens and of course all the cows. And it seemed like a little paradise, all these animals that were as free range as it gets. I mean, the chickens were quite literally just allowed to go wherever. They had a little roost where they would lay eggs and the farmer would collect the eggs from. The horses had this huge pasture that they were like walking around. It was just two of them. And there was like literally miles and miles and miles of pasture land where the cows were grazing. So when people talk about free range, this was literally as free range as it gets. I'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end. At first, everything seemed perfectly fine. The husband and the wife were super friendly to me. They were very accommodating. They gave me my own room. They told me that I could eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And so yeah, it was cool. And the first couple days I was working with them 100% of their day and really seeing what they experienced. And very quickly I realized that farming is extremely hard work. It is, you wake up at 5 a.m. and you essentially work the whole day until 7 or 8 p.m. And there's not any kind of, weekends or vacations or anything. When you're milking cows, they produce milk every single day and they need to be milked or else they're going to develop infections, and that could be seriously harmful to the consumer and ultimately extremely harmful to the cow. So it was, kind of a wake-up call, like, hey, this farming stuff, pretty serious, pretty hard. Things got kind of difficult kind of fast. It was clear to me that I had not really been very diligent about setting up the terms of my stay. I mentioned to the farmer that woofing was what I had in mind when I had kind of begun this journey, and I had assumed that he would understand the kind of split between break and work, but there was no understanding of that whatsoever. So the first 12 days that I was there, I worked from 7 a.m. or basically 5 a.m. until about 7 p.m. And I kind of lost my illusion of what this experience was going to be very quickly. I mean, it seemed to me at first like this would kind of, be like a very magical experience in a way, but all of that working, I mean, these 12 to 14 hour days, every single day for 12 days, like really took a toll on me. And keep in mind, I was 18 at this point. The only job that I'd ever had was being a lifeguard at a pool, and that's not really a whole lot of work. And a lot of lifeguards will tell you different, but being a lifeguard at a pool is a very easy job. I mean, yeah, it's really intense when you have to jump in and save somebody, but the time in between is a lot of sitting, a lot of doing not that much. And so to be thrown into this environment where I was now doing manual labor every day, all day, was super intense, and it really, took a toll on me emotionally. I mean, I remember calling my mom, and I told her, like, hey, like, I don't think I can do this anymore. This is really way too hard for me. And she said, well, have you talked to them about it? And I said, no, I hadn't. And my confidence was not so good at that point. I was young. I had never like really lived away from home like that. And so I wasn't very confident in, going up to this person who was still essentially a stranger and saying, hey, this is not really what I had in mind. And being that I was already there, I felt that I had some kind of obligation to, work on their terms, which I absolutely didn't. But so finally, after 12 days, I went up to him and said, hey, this is not really what I had in mind. It's a little too difficult compared to what I know is going to be sustainable for me. He was very understanding. He said that maybe just 5 days a week would be adequate. And so what I told him was that I wanted to work the whole day. I didn't want to just do 5 hours of work and then, go watch Netflix or something. Like, I wanted to really be engaged and help them throughout the whole day, because 5 hours is really only like one milking period. And so they wouldn't have anybody to help them with the second milking period unless they were to go out and hire somebody. Again, all of these things I was being way too empathetic and, over analyzing their situation, whereas I was a human too, and so I didn't really give myself a whole lot of consideration for what I really needed, which ultimately led to a lot of miscommunication and frankly was what I believe really paved the way for me being treated the way that I was ultimately treated. What I suggested to the farmer was that I would do 4 days a week and, just get 3 days off. And that way I could work the whole 4 day, or I could work the whole day, all 4 days, and then I could have a little bit longer of a weekend. And that way I wasn't really trading any kind of amount of effort, should I say. Again, that was kind of false because, that meant that they were getting me for one less day. And so seriously intense tasks like milking and repasturing they weren't going to have another person to help them. So I don't really know what my thought process was, but again, I was really young and I wasn't super confident in the things that I was bringing up. That said though, he still agreed to the 4 days, and so that was what became the norm for me from then on. Pretty quickly, however, things got a lot worse. I realized soon after I arrived that these people were in seriously dire financial straits. They were in a lot of debt to the main company that owned them, and I think the company was Organic Valley. And that's just because there's a huge amount of costs when it comes to being a small business owner and a farm owner. And so, facility upkeep, equipment upkeep, all of these things require a lot of money that you probably don't have when, you are being paid for a few gallons of milk every day. And I don't know how many gallons. They had about 50 cows that were being milked every single day. But, so it was pretty clear that they were in really dire financial straits. They also had a kid who was in rehab at the time, and I know that that was taking a massive toll on them, and they told me that. But what I didn't really realize was the connection between financial struggle and emotional maintenance. And this is something that I really should have known because I came, at the time I was coming from a house where we didn't have the most money, and I could see that toll being taken on my parents and the toll that it was taking on me and my siblings as well. And so, I wasn't able at the time to really connect those and be like, oh, wait a minute, this is probably not the best situation for me to be in. And so it wasn't until I started taking a lot of the blows from the kind of emotional and other kinds of struggles that they were having, and I became like a scapegoat for a lot of that I realized, like, damn, this stuff really does translate. There were a lot of little things that started to lead up to my realization that I was not going to be recognized as like a mentee or a young person who was learning. There was a lot of I don't want to say expectations, but there was a lot of things that they kind of I think they took for granted that they didn't really realize, like, damn, we're going to have to do a lot of teaching, right? I didn't know anything about farming. I was a young person. I'd only had one, like, real job before doing this. And so there was a lot of time that I wasn't necessarily taught what it is that I should be doing. And so they would tell me, hey, go do this, go do this. And I might ask for some degree of directions, but they, would give instructions coming from a place of expertise and not necessarily passing down all of the steps that I needed to do. And so part of, my lack of confidence in going forth and asking them, hey, I really need some much more, concrete, much more laid out instructions of how to do this thing. I would just kind of be like, yep, sounds good. And then I would go do it because I was afraid to, look stupid or, be called stupid or whatever. And mind you, I wasn't really being chastised or anything at this point. This was very early on in my stay, and so I wasn't, they were holding a lot back as far as, how they really felt about my questions and even my presence, should I say. This made things a lot worse because over time, or should I say, like, at first, I would go do things and not do them 100% right, which would lead to problems further down the road, which would then kind of lead them to be more aggressive or, more open with their disappointment in me. And that just kind of grew and grew and grew, and that kind of toxic cycle of, me being afraid to ask about things and then them delivering criticism and feedback in a way that was extremely, negative and derogatory. The first experience that really, opened up my eyes to the way that this relationship was going to manifest was one night after working the whole day. I was in my room, and I think I had just finished helping them make dinner, and it was just the wife, because the husband had gone on a trip to be part of some dairy council, and I can't remember if it was like the Maine Dairy Council or the National Dairy Council or whatever, but it was just her and I. And so after the end of the day, we'd finished making dinner. She came into my room and basically told me that she felt like I wasn't pulling my weight, and that I'd been here about 15 days at this point. She basically told me that she felt as though I wasn't doing the work that I needed to do. And I was a little bit shocked at this, because I felt that I was, helping them from sunup until sundown, from when they, when they had suggested that I wake up to the point when they would be like, "Oh, you're all good, we're done for the day." And so, came inside, I helped her make some dinner. I can't remember what it was, but she came into my room and basically, I don't want to say she went on a rant, but she really, was expressing that she felt like I wasn't doing enough. And I was really kind of taken aback. I didn't really know what to think or to say, because I was like, I thought I'm doing everything right. I thought I was doing everything right. I think, my room is clean. I don't see any problem with my room. I've literally only taken like 2 showers at this point, so it can't be anything there. And so ultimately what it was she felt that the stovetop was dirty, and that I had contributed to making the stovetop dirty. So I was like, yeah, okay. I mean, that makes sense, fair enough, right? So I went upstairs to clean the stove, and what I noticed was, and obviously I'd probably noticed this before, but I was being very conscious of it now, was that the stovetop was gross. I mean, it was a gas stove, so there were grates on the top of the stove. And, when you clean a gas stove, you take the grates off. And quite literally, under the grates, there was like a huge amount of grime. Like, so much grime that there's no way that, even if, for the 15 days that I'd been there, even if I had cooked something, put it on my plate, and then immediately just dumped the contents of the pan, whatever was left, onto the stove, there's no way that I could have left all that. And so I was a little bit nervous at first. I was like, wait a minute, why are you putting this on me? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, there's no way that I would have been able to do this single-handedly. This is something that's been, happening for probably months, And so, I cleaned it, and it took me a really long time to clean. It probably took me like 25 minutes overall to like scrape everything off, and then, sponge it down. And then I never heard anything about that. Like, I never got like a thank you, or like, that was good or something. And not that I really was expecting that or looking for that, but it was kind of significant to the situation. And it would be these two, this thing would become kind of like a signifier of how the rest of the experience was going to go. Later on in that week, probably 5 or 6 days later, I ended up getting really sick. So keep in mind, I probably had been here like 21, 22 days now. And I ended up getting really, really sick, and I was bedridden. And it was a pretty terrible experience. I mean, I didn't really hear anything from them. I sent them a text. I told the husband the first day that I was sick, that was like, yeah, I'm feeling pretty sick, I don't think that I can, work today. He was like, yeah, makes sense, that's fine. And so, I basically just spent the day in bed. I was watching Netflix or something, and that's just kind of, how it went. I didn't really do the best job in taking care of myself. Part of that was like a feeling of nervousness. Like, I didn't want to like interact with them and have them feel like, oh, this kid is weak, he's, not, pulling his own or whatever. And so I didn't take care of myself as effectively as I should have. And the result of that was that I ended up being very sick and bedridden for about 4 days. During those 4 days, The next 3 days, I texted the farmer every morning and told him that yeah, I wasn't gonna be able to do it today, and it got to the point where he just like he didn't respond to those texts, and they didn't even do anything. Like they didn't check on me or anything, and it was that like fear of looking stupid or pathetic that I wouldn't come out of my room, and so I would just stay in there, and I subsisted literally off of like water and just like random snacks that I had, like peanuts and other little things like that. Not at all the kind of sustenance that you should be giving your body when you're sick. And so I just ended up being sick for a lot longer than I really should have. Finally, on the 4th day, I came out of my room. I think on the 5th day, actually, I came out of my room and I was like, all right, I'm gonna, interact, I'm gonna do things. I was feeling a lot better, and so I was like, all right, it's time for me to get to work. So that day I worked the whole day. I felt great, I felt fine. Then at the end of the day, I was in the kitchen helping the wife like make some food, and she asked me what I was gonna do over the weekend, and I had planned to work because I was like, well, I've been in my room all this time not working. Like that's a good enough, weekend, right? And so she asked me what I was gonna do for the weekend, but she kind of quickly went into being like, yeah, you literally just stayed pent up in your room all this time. Like, are you just gonna do that again? And I was like, huh, well, no. I mean, I was pent up in my room because I was really sick. And I made up a really crappy excuse. I was like, no, I stayed in my room because I was helping my friend write a screenplay. And it's true, like me and my friend had been writing a screenplay for this movie idea that we had for a while, and so that's part of what, I'd been doing in bed, just like, typing up some little ideas that I'd had. But it was kind of like this little jab that I was like, that was kind of an ignorant thing to say. I was sick. I wasn't just like watching Netflix and like jerking off because I wanted to. I was just, I was sick. I was lying in bed, sick. I was sleeping most of the time. And so I didn't say any of these things, but, I told her the screenplay thing, and, she's just kind of like, oh yeah, great. There was another night that it was just the two of us, me and the wife farmer that were, working together. And so at the end of the day, we packed up everything, we, all was well, and then I went to bed. I got this knock on my door in the middle of the night. It was about 12 midnight, 12 or 12:30. And she tells me that there's a cow giving birth. And usually these things are scheduled, right? And so what I come to find out was that this had been scheduled, that, she knew that generally this was the time, the day and the time of day that she was going to try to do this. And so I, put my boots on, put my gear on real quick and run out and help her do this. The whole time that we are trying to yank this calf out of this cow, she's like, she's basically chastising me for not pulling it in the right direction, or not pulling it the right way, or, just doing something wrong, being in the way. It doesn't matter. Like I was being basically yelled at the whole time. And I understand it's a high stress situation, but it was just another thing that was more symbolic of that kind of attitude. And keep in mind, again, this was pretty early in the stay. I don't remember if this was before or after I got sick, but it was in that same week, okay? And so after about 45 minutes, we finally were able to yank out the calf. The calf was sequestered because calves are always immediately taken away from their mothers when they're born, because, the longer individuals are with their loved ones, the stronger the bond becomes. And so we took the calf away. Well, the cow's like screaming because they call out for their young. That's just what happens. All living beings call out for their young. Most living beings call out for their young, shall I say. We pack up and she just kind of chuckles and says, see you at 5. Well, 5 is when we usually wake up, right? So I don't know how to characterize this as being something that was, offensive and like not hurtful, but it was just like, damn, really, like no thank yous, no like, yeah, great job, we got that together, it was just like, see you at 5. And I was just like, are you kidding me? you know, and I was so angry at that, you know. I just felt so used. I felt so taken for granted. Like, all of these things were compiling, and I was supposed to be here for 3 months, you know, and so barely even 1 month in, and I can already tell that, you know, the relationship that I have with her is just outwardly toxic. Like, you know, she is outwardly like mean to me, and I can't bear to like face it. You know, I was afraid to really like say anything back or anything, so I would just kind of take all of this and like satisfy that interaction by like feeling stupid. I was like, I'd rather feel stupid than like get into some kind of argument. The other guy himself, he was not as outwardly toxic to me, but there would be times when I would screw up that he would just lose his mind essentially, and like just curse and like throw things. And like, I would say that there were instances of physical abuse because he would like snatch things from me. And one time I was like holding a board that it was like a 4x4 piece of wood, and it had nails like sticking out of it, and he like yanked it out of my hand like whoosh. Like, it wasn't a super big cut, but it was just like enough that I was like, what the fuck? And I was like, ah, and he didn't respond at all. So it was a lot of little things like that, you know, it just made me feel so isolated, so alone. There's 3 stories that I remember very specifically that I'm going to share just to kind of characterize this a little bit more. There was a truck that they had. It was like a really large truck, not necessarily an 18-wheeler, but like 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, like 10-wheeler kind of truck, big flatbed, that I was asked to drive multiple times and drive into town to get goods from this hardware store that they had a partnership with. And there's no way that I was like legally allowed to drive this truck. It was extremely old, and so it was a manual truck, and so they knew that I could drive manual, and so they just had me drive this truck multiple times to, you know, go and get goods that, you know, there's no way that I was legally able to drive this truck. And, you know, I never like crashed, I never, you know, anything like that, but it was just a very terrifying experience to have to do something that you literally have no idea how to do. Like, I stalled it out a couple times in intersections and stuff, and it just caused me a lot of like, you know, fear when they'd be like, oh, yep, it's time to go pick up these things. And I would, you know, man, just getting in and, you know, just that fear of like walking up those like little steps to get into the truck was like so terrifying. And having to do that over and over and over again, I was like, dude, I'm scared that I'm gonna hurt somebody. I'm scared that I'm gonna crash. I'm scared that I'm gonna get pulled over and then like go to jail or something, because you have to have a CDL to drive one of these things, and I just don't. So that was a really big issue for me. There was a lot of machinery that they asked me to operate that I just did not feel qualified for at all. And the reason that pole yank experience happened, where I handed him the thing and he yanked it out of my hand, was I was cleaning out a barn one day and I was backing out with this tractor, and the edge of the tractor bucket just barely nicked the wall, and it yanked that post completely off, like out of the barn. And so that's where that experience happened, where we were fixing it and I handed him the post back and he just yoinked it out of my hand, you know, just angrily like fixing it. And again, I get it. Like, it was, when you work all day and you never have breaks, efficiency is king. And so when little issues happen where you know, like something's broken and you got to go fix it and you got to take that much extra time out of your day to go fix it, that becomes an issue. That becomes something that is now taking away from your time where you should have been doing other things. All of this said, I would argue that it would be much easier to save time, to be more efficient, when you train somebody and when you tell somebody 100% how to do something. Because yeah, that takes more time in the now, but in the long term, you're avoiding things like broken barns, like broken equipment, like cows literally getting free. There was one time where I didn't like latch a gate properly, and because I just assumed like, duh, it's just a gate, you just latch it. But what happened was, they had 4 pieces of rope on the gate, right? And so rather than basically on this side of the gate, they would do these types of knots that, you know, were like latch knots. On the other side, they were just hinges. And what happened was I only did one of the knots, And so one of the cows like pushed up under the fence and ran. And then all the other cows in this barn were like, dude, we're free. And they all did the same thing. And so it literally took hours to get all of these cows back into their enclosure. Little tiny things like that where, you would expect, somebody, if you've been doing this every single day, you're just like, duh, two rope latches. But for me, it wasn't like that. Like, I hadn't done that before. And so when he said just go latch the gate, like, I saw the piece of rope, I saw the 2 pieces of rope on the top, and I pulled them and tied them. I didn't see the piece of rope at the bottom. And so, yeah, that just led to a whole other little situation of chaos that, I caused something to happen. And so they just lost their minds, and being around them trying to like corral these cows was just absolute hell. Like, being chastised the whole time, being told like, this was so simple. Anybody could have done this, and yeah, you fucked it up. And it was, it was maddening. Another situation regarding the equipment, there was one time where I was, driving a tractor, and I basically went to like pick up this bale of hay. Luckily, I was by myself, and I say, not like luckily in the sense of safety, because if I had been killed in this situation, or I had been like hurt in this situation, I would not have been able to do anything. I say luckily from the perspective that thank God they weren't around, so they like weren't there to like, make fun of me or like call me like an idiot or something. And so what happened was I basically picked up this bale of hay, and I picked it all the way up on the tractor, and so the equilibrium of weight was completely off. So what happened was the tractor like basically bucked forward, dropped off this bale of hay, all of this like mud and shit just like boom into my face, and then the tractor like rocked, like yoinked back, and so I was just like tossed around this little metal container like like a little pinball. And I was just sitting there just like breathing, like covered in poop and dirt, just like, dude, like, my head was sore, my body was sore. Oh man, I was so like, I didn't know what just happened. It was like I was just hit by a train or something. Time goes on and Thanksgiving comes around, and I left the farm to go basically spend Thanksgiving with my family in Ohio. So what I did was I drove down to Boston, met my uncles who live in Boston, and together we drove out to Ohio to visit the rest of our family. While I was there, my mom and my dad were there, and my uncles and a couple of my aunts were there, and I was kind of telling them what was happening, and I was being honest because I didn't have a lot of social interaction, and so my filter was pretty much non-existent. And so I was telling them exactly what happened, and they were like shocked. They were, I think they were terrified for my safety. That the barn that they had, one of the barns was actually like keeled like this. So long ways, it was actually completely tilted, and it seemed like it could just blow over at any time. But over time, you just kind of normalize it. You're just like, it is what it is. And so they're hearing all this stuff. I didn't tell them as much about the way that the farmers were treating me, but they basically begged me to like leave. They basically were like, you can't stay. And at this point, it was like the 20th of November, and I kind of like told myself that I was a pussy if I didn't finish. The last day that I was scheduled to be there was December 14th, and so I figured, dude, I'm only going to be there for like 20 more days. I'll tough it out, I'll suck it up. I don't think I really realized the extent to which I was being, taken advantage of, and the abuse that I was really having to experience because I'd normalized it so much. I mean, at this point, I basically spent no time around the farmers that wasn't for work. I would help them like make dinner, and we would eat dinner together, but it was very weird. It was very cold. Like, they would talk to each other, but they didn't ask me anything. I wouldn't ask them anything. We'd just eat together, boom, call it a day. All other meals, I would not eat, with them. I would basically find a break in the job that I was doing. I would go inside. If I heard them upstairs in the kitchen, I wouldn't go up there. I would just go back outside. So I didn't really realize how much of a toxic situation that it had become. But when I would really think about it, I didn't like them. And it was very clear that they didn't like me. But it was also very clear that they didn't like each other. There was a lot of, really negative energy that went between them. And so when I think back on it, yeah, like I was verbally abused. I was physically abused to some degree. I was definitely like emotionally manipulated sometimes. But all of these things, I can't say like it was like a coordinated effort. You know, it was just the result of me entering an extremely toxic situation. I don't really know what else to say. I'm not somebody who really victimizes myself a lot of the time, and I think a lot, like, to some degree, that comes around to bite me, and that I hold myself to a standard that is not really sustainable a lot of the time. I brush off like how other people treat me, and I don't really hold it. I don't want to say I don't hold it against them, but I don't really take it seriously enough. I often tell myself that the things that we experience from others are simply a reflection of how we look at ourselves, and I still believe that to some degree. I'm trying to allow myself to realize that what I experienced was definitely pretty intense trauma and pretty intense abuse. And so, I'm still coming to terms with that. I think that's part of why this video has been so hard for me to film, because I don't know necessarily how it has affected me in the long run. I think it's probably further ingrained, like a fear of interacting and a fear of being confrontational when it comes to personal things. I have no problem being confrontational when it comes to my morals and my values, but when it comes to like debating stuff, but when it comes to like, hey, I feel like I've been, done wrong or something, I oftentimes just chalk it up to my own weakness. And so it's still, I guess I still don't really know the point of this video. I don't know what it is that I'm trying to like get past. I don't know even what it is that I experienced that it has affected me for the long term. All I know is that it is something that happened. I'm so grateful that I went. I'm grateful that I got to walk away, because they're still there, still farming as far as I'm concerned. And so these things that, really hurt me in just a short period of time, I can't even imagine the kind of emotional pain that they are dealing with. And since then, things I know have gotten significantly worse for them. I mean, obviously, we have the issues with the dairy industry failing. They've had issues with their kid who was in rehab, who, is now, he is now gone. He lost his life, I heard, about 2 years ago. So these things I got to walk away from, but I'm still struggling with the experience and the significance of it. I don't know 100% what it means. I don't know what to do with it. And so that's the side of what happened to me and how it affected me. So now you know about my story. You know about how it affected me. But the main reason that I wanted to film this was not necessarily to, create any kind of sympathy for me, or, create some kind of victim story as to why I am the way I am. It just is something that happened to me and something that I wanted to share. I think that authenticity is really important and vulnerability is really important. And so that's why I'm, putting this all out publicly. I don't think I've ever shared to the depth that I have in this video what happened to me. And so I hope that is something that you as the viewer can appreciate, and something that kind of helps to, I don't know, put trust in me, for example. And that's what I want to create kind of before I share my opinion on dairy farming and essentially what happens to the cows. What I'm going to tell you is the process of how dairy is cultivated. This is something that happens in every farm ever. There's no farm that this stuff is exempt from. Maybe the intricacies and the details of how it happens, but ultimately the way that it happens is the same. The way that dairy is cultivated is the same on any farm. So essentially what needs to happen is cows have to be inseminated in order to produce milk. There's a huge misconception that I hear from a lot of people that cows produce milk naturally year-round. That is absolutely false. That is biologically impossible. And I want to dispel that myth right now. Cows need to be forcefully impregnated in order to be producing milk. We in the vegan community call this rape, because that is what it is. There's no situation in which somebody could be forcefully inseminated that we would not call rape if it was in the context of a human being. And thus it is rape when it's in the context of a cow. So what happens is Cows are typically chained up to multiple gates. The reason that we do this is to protect ourselves as the farmers. It has nothing to do with the cows. So they're typically chained from 4 different locations that isolates their movement as much as possible. And then the farmer takes a syringe that is full of bull semen, puts on a plastic glove, and reaches into the cow's anus, pulls out any basically defecation or anything that's in the way. And the anus and the vagina are basically located through the same duct, being the butthole. And you basically take the giant syringe and you put the bull semen into the cow. This is how cows are impregnated. There's no situation in which this doesn't happen. Anybody that argues that, cows are, naturally reproducing and that's how the milk is being collected, if that's happening in 0.00001% of farms. That's not the norm, and if that's your argument, that's a cruel argument, and it should never be used. Once cows are inseminated, they're typically put into a pasture area or some kind of cordoned off area that puts them with cows that are coming into heat or cows that are, becoming pregnant. And as there comes a point when they're becoming pregnant that they then start to produce milk. And I'm not sure when that is. It's probably around the 3rd or 4th month of them, having been impregnated, that they're then able to start producing milk, that they're then put into the, the cordoned off area with the cows that have, that are producing milk and thus can be milked. What happens when the cow gives birth? So the kid typically, I don't know how long it takes for cows to give birth, but all these numbers are things that I don't really know because I was never told by the farmer and I never really cared to look into it. I should have added that after I left, I became extremely resentful of cows. Like I literally had like PTSD for a while that I couldn't really, be around cows, as weird as that sounds. But I never cared to like look into this and research any of this information. So I don't actually know how long cows are in heat. I don't actually know how long they are pregnant for. I don't know any of that information. What I do know is that when cows are born, they, are typically, in all farms, cows are born into crud situations. I mean, I watched a cow be born onto a concrete floor covered in shit. And that calf was, just breathing for life. And as soon as they're born, they're sequestered. They're taken away from their mothers because that milk isn't for them. That milk is for us. Calves are then put into a, some kind of pen to, keep them. And their mothers are pretty much immediately just taken back and put back with the milking cows because they can then be milked for a, period of time because that milk should be given to their babies. But instead, we're fucking drinking it because we drink breast milk because that's normal. So what happens is the calves are then put into pens. They're divided based on their gender. Female cows usually the farmer will keep because that's just more production capacity. Male cows are either sold off to beef farms or immediately sold for veal. Much like other livestock production, the males have no other use other than their flesh, and so the veal is baby calf. When you buy veal, that's what you're buying. You're buying a baby, the flesh of a baby, and they are so they're sequestered and basically immediately sold to veal farmers. Oftentimes beef farms will buy up the calves and then raise them up to the age of anywhere between 8 months and 3 years. And then once they reach adequate size, they're slaughtered for their meat. Like I mentioned, I witnessed a calf be born onto a concrete floor covered in poop. I've witnessed a calf be born into mud. At one point I was tending a field and I came out to where the cows were. They were in a little herd kind of lying on the ground, and it was cold outside, and I was herding the cows back inside when I noticed that there was a hoof kind of sticking out of the ground, and I went over and I found that there was a baby calf that had been born into a mud pit that then froze to death and just froze in the mud pit. They didn't know that cow was pregnant. How they didn't know that, I don't know, because they literally raped the cow themselves. But regardless, that's where I found that calf. Calves are taken care of, as though they are products. So, there's very little love in the upbringing of a calf. And why would there be when you know that that calf is either going to be raised to be a piece of production or raised to be killed? Oftentimes calves become sick and they very easily die because they don't have the nutrients that they need to survive, because a lot of the time they're being given milk that is not necessarily the best of quality, or milk that is pumped with antibiotics and other kinds of medicines that actually damage their bodies and allow for illnesses and bacteria to invade their immune system and kill them. And so there was a point at which these two calves that had been born became extremely sick and in the pen that they were in, and so they had to be sequestered to another pen in order to not get the other calves sick. However, they ended up dying. And so both of these calves did in fact die. And the job that I was tasked with was putting them into a front-loading tractor and taking them out and dumping them in a compost bin. And I just heaved the calves into this tractor and I drove them out into the woods and I dug a hole and I buried the calves. And I don't know, in that moment, I think that was what, part of what really started to make me realize, like, damn, these are beings. Like, these are living creatures. And so is it really adequate to just dump them in a compost bin? That calf that was born into the mud and froze to death, I pointed it out to the farmer and his reaction was just, well, goddamn, that is a calf. And we left it. We didn't do anything with it. And the cows would go back to that spot, over and over again. And it was interesting that, for weeks after that point, that spot was where they, gathered, even though the grass there wasn't ideal for eating, even though, there wasn't any grass to, like, pad their bodies as they lay down, they still went back. And again, you can argue whatever it is that you want, but the reality is that they are thinking, living, sentient beings that think, that love, that fear. And so what they were doing, quite obviously, if you're a decent person with a sense of empathy, you realize that those cows were mourning the death of that baby calf. For the first 4 to 6 months of their lives, most of the time calves will be chained to a stockade. When they're big enough that they can no longer be fit in the pens, they're typically chained to a stockade and they spend the entire 4 to 6 months in one position, right, facing one direction. And that makes it easy for us to feed them in the front and scoop up their poop in the back. And literally for that amount of time, they are, basically standing in one position, just eating and pooping. And constantly, all day, they never move. A lot of people will argue that this is just in one farm situation. I had the displeasure of visiting multiple farms while I was there, on different kinds of runs, on different chore expeditions and stuff. I would go to other farms to borrow equipment or whatever it was, and I saw many, many different farming situations. And I can say that more or less it is always the same. Cows are divided based on their age, and this is discluding the males, again, because the males are immediately sold for meat. Whatever it is, whether they're going to be slaughtered immediately for veal, or whether they're going to be raised to the age of, 8 months to 3 years and then slaughtered as a full-size male bull. As it pertains to the dairy farm, however, calves are, separated based on their age to make it much easier for them to control. So calves that are between the ages of, 0 and 8 months are typically chained up in one position so that they just, eat as much as they can so they get big as quickly as possible. Heifers that are of age to be inseminated get, put into another section so that they're easy to like chain up and then take into the corral where they then become inseminated. And then dairying cows are of another age. Quite obviously, there are no situations, no dairy farms in which cows that are spent, that are no longer of age to be milked, are, let to live out the rest of their old age. They're killed immediately. There was a point when, one of the farmers was like laughing at the concept of animal sanctuaries, saying that it basically makes no sense to let a cow live out its life till old age. And so that goes to show you that even in a situation where people claim to love their animals, people claim to be doing this, you know, because they love animals, are full of shit, and they're completely disillusioned because they're unable to empathetically put themselves in the position of one of the cows and saying, you know, do I feel like I would want to be forcefully impregnated over and over and over again until I physically could not give birth to another cow or another child, to the point where then I would be sent off to a slaughterhouse and sold for cheap meat. I'm not really sure what else to add. I think I've done a pretty decent job of fleshing out what the situation is like, at least on that farm. But again, there is no such thing as a humane dairy farm. There is no such thing as humane animal farming. This situation was as humane as it gets. And keep in mind, I have personally witnessed factory farms. I have personally witnessed other small organic farms where the same things are happening, perhaps in different ways, but ultimately the purpose of the practice is to exploit the animal for its own excretion. And there is no situation in which cows are being allowed to live out their lives after being forcefully impregnated over and over again. They're then killed. If you have any questions or comments about this experience, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll answer anybody and everybody that has a question or a comment. Again, I know this video was a lot and it's long and intense, and for that I am sorry for, you know, anything that might have offended anybody or, you know, scared anybody, but this is truth, this is what happened to me, and this is the regular practice of the dairy industry. I know this is not the regular kind of content that I post, but I appreciate you guys for sticking through. I really appreciate you for watching this video. And again, any kind of information that you want to run by me or questions that you have for me, I'm always happy to talk to you guys. So you can reach me on pretty much any social media platform at ZachOy. The O is actually a 0. And until next time, guys, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate you watching this video, and I hope to be making more videos more regularly, so keep in touch, hit that subscribe button, hit that little notification bell for more stuff in the future, and until next time, much love, thank you so much, goodbye. Alabama.